Today we're going to be discussing how to develop and insert a fragment into a project schedule. Fragnet is short for fragmented network, which is a network of activities that is independent of the project schedule activities and can be inserted into the schedule and tied in logically. You develop fragnets for modifications or RFIs to indicate if there's a delay that's being caused by a non-response to an RFI, or if there is additional time needed for an added portion of work, or if a portion of work has been deleted and a modification issued, we can show how that's going to affect the overall schedule and if it's going to reduce the time. So the first thing we want to do is we want to save the file as a schedule fragnet, so that way we're not overwriting anything else. And what we want to do is we want to take the latest schedule update that we did and use that as our basis for the new fragnet. So what we need to do is we need to begin by building a WBS for the fragnet. And we can either hit the insert button on our keyboard, or we can insert a task up here as such. We can do that. It'll insert a task, and what we want to do is we want to title this Fragnet, because this is going to be our Fragnet WBS, like we have pre-construction. So we keep inserting, and we want to insert the first Fragnet we're going to do is we're going to make up a scenario. We're going to say modified light fixture. So this will be indented underneath Fragnet, and the shortcut for that is Alt-Shift and then the arrow key. That'll push it over. And what we want to do is we just want to begin building the fragnet, which is just basically an outline of what's taken place. So we start off by saying RFI 001 was submitted to the client. And this will fall under that like that. And let's say that that's a milestone. So we want to click on this and make it a milestone. Mark task as milestone. We want to add the calendar to 5-day with holidays. Say OK. So that's a 0-day activity. Now with the first activity in a fragnet, we want to anchor this to a certain point. We can say that this RFI was submitted. Let's say must start on, let's say 10/20. Say OK. So that'll kick it out to 10/20. So now we have that. And what we'll do is we'll continue to add activities to develop the fragnet. So as you can see, we added the rest of the activities. We added durations to those activities. So the response to the RFI, 14 days, and all of that. Say the procurement is 35 days for these light fixtures. Now when we add these activities, we want to make sure we also select a calendar for these activities. So if we double click on the activity, it'll pull up this task information dialog box. You check the calendar to make sure it says 7-day calendar for any kind of client or government review. So the response, submittal approval will be under a 7-day calendar as well. So we have the basic structure: RFI sent, response, cost proposal, projected negotiations, submittal development approval, light fixture procurement, delivery, and then installation. Now what we want to do is we want to develop the logic that drives this fragnet. Now we already have a must start on constraint on this activity, so it does not need a predecessor. So what we can do is, since most of this fragnet is laid out logically, we can just insert predecessors as such. So we'll say it's 5. This is fairly simple. Sometimes with fragnets, we'll get to a scenario where partially into the fragnet we'll have to add another relationship within the schedule to tie the fragnet to the schedule. Oftentimes, though, these fragments can be somewhat simplistic, where only the last activity needs to tie into the schedule, and these are kind of independent structures. So we'll just keep going down and saying finish, start, finish, start, finish, start for all of these activities. Now when we get down to this light fixture installation activity, what we're saying here is, because of this type of light fixture, there's additional installation time above and beyond what we originally put in the schedule. So what we need to do is we need to tie this to light fixture delivery, so that'll be 11. But we also need to tie this to the light fixture installation that was in the original schedule. So we'll have to scroll down and look for the original light fixture installation. That's right here, activity 100. So we'll come back up to light fixture installation, and activity 100 will be a predecessor as well. So we'll put that in there, and that kicks it out even further. Now we need to tie the schedule into, or the fragment into the main schedule. So we'll go down here, and the easiest thing to do is to look at, well, we had light fixtures going in before. What were their successors? Installation of the ceiling tile, electrical terminations, and final connections. So we can say, well, logically we can just put those successors in there as the successors for this activity. So ID 86 and 101. So we'll come in here to successor, type in 86, 101. Now as you can see, that kicked our schedule out to negative 16 days of float. And originally, with our latest update, the 1031 update, we only had negative 14 days of float. So now, this fragment, this modification of light fixture types, is actually driving the schedule. It is now the longest path within the critical path. So, what this will tell the client or the user is that if they decide to make this change, we will be entitled to an additional 16 days of time to be added on to the contract. With these 16 days, depending on if that previous negative 14 days was the customer's liability or if that was the contractor's liability, we'll be entitled to either the 16 days or 2 days. And again, this is kind of negotiable at this point. They can say, well, it's not going to take us that long to get back the submittal approval. It'll only take us 2 days. So you can come down and say, well, it's still 16 days. Like, well, why is that? And the reason is because the light fixture installation is driving the process. As you can see here, there's a gap between delivery and installation. So we're going to get the light fixtures on January 1st. But we're not going to install them until January 12th. So there's that gap. So what's driving this activity, and what we can do, we can go look, we can click inspect here, and it'll pull up this sidebar. And it'll let you know what is driving this activity. So what's driving this activity is the installation of the light fixtures, not the fixture delivery. Now if we were to put, let's say it's going to take us 50 days to get those light fixtures. Now we can look and say, okay, we're on here, light fixture installation. Light fixture delivery is now driving light fixture installation. No longer like the original light fixture installation activity. Now this pushes out the schedule negative 19 days. As you can see here, though, we have, this is negative 27, so you say, well, why does it add up to negative 27 up top? And the reason is because Microsoft Projects, when it calculates Slack, it also uses the calendar type for the activity to calculate in that Slack. So if it's on a 7-day schedule, a normal week, if you're behind one whole week, it'll be negative 7 days. Whereas if you're on a 5-day schedule, a whole week will only be negative 5 days of float. So that's where the differences come into. And it's a little bit more complex than that, but what's important is that where it sums up at the top, that is your actual negative float or your negative slack. And the activity that's on the end and that's driving the CCD is where you'll actually look and see, okay, so it's negative 19 days of slack, and that's what's driving the schedule. So this is kind of a brief overview of how to insert a fragment into a schedule, and also kind of how to look at, okay, well, what's driving what, and how to also kind of analyze what is responsible for driving the schedule. Now, when developing these fragnets, when we develop the narrative that is associated with these fragments, we need to list each activity that we insert, the duration that that activity is, and its relationships. So we need to justify why there's an additional 6 days for the light fixture installation. And in the narrative is the appropriate time to discuss that, to put down, well, these light fixtures are more difficult to install, requiring additional labor and time. So that is why we included an additional 6 days for light fixture installation. Then you'll discuss the successors and how that's going to work. Now, the client might come back and say, well, you can actually begin terminating light fixtures as you're going, which is often the case. Or you can begin installing ceiling tiles prior to the completion of the light fixture installation. And you can negotiate that. You can say, okay, well, I'll put a finish-to-finish relationship on ceiling tile installation, and that might give them some time. That way they don't have to pay for the complete 19 days of overhead and field office and whatnot for the contractor. I might be able to trim it down to 16 or 15. So those are just negotiations that'll happen in the course of the fragnet, and that narrative will provide them the explanation, and if they want to refute something, you guys can discuss that. So that's basically inserting a fragnet, writing the narrative for it, and then negotiating the finer details of the logic and the durations within the fragnet. So this, again, can be used for modifications, RFIs, adding time, removing time from the schedule, and whatnot. So this is a fragnet.